The smooth, flawless sheen of our high-resolution smartphone screens does not open a window into a wider world, but rather serves as a cold digital mirror that demands our constant, hyper-vigilant presentation. We sit in the soft, ambient lighting of exclusive networking lounges, our fingers lightly brushing against the crisp, heavy texture of high-status business cards, while we breathe in the sharp, artificial clarity of designer perfumes. The air in these spaces carries a subtle, electric tension, the ambient noise of dozens of voices, perfectly calibrated to the precise frequencies of intellectual sophistication and professional success. We look at our curated social feeds, our carefully constructed professional biographies, and our invitations to elite panels or exclusive gatherings, and we feel a fleeting, superficial wave of validation. We tell ourselves that we have arrived, that we are aligning with our true peers, and that we are doing the necessary work of building a significant, high-impact life in the upper tiers of our cultural and professional landscapes. Yet, the moment the crowd thins and the doors of the pavilion slide shut behind us, the silence we encounter does not feel like the rich, restorative peace of a quiet forest. It feels like the terrifying, weightless void of a total erasure. We look at our reflection in the polished glass of an empty elevator, and we perceive the distinct, chilly atmosphere of an invisible ghost. We have become a society of mirror chasers, individuals who have outsourced our very existence to the validation, the applause, and the recognition of an elite peer group. We have turned our personal worth into a relentless, ongoing public relations campaign, treating every social encounter, every dinner conversation, and every professional milestone as a tactical performance designed to secure a favorable reflection in the eyes of those we deem important. We use our achievements and our social proximity not to connect with others from a place of shared human vulnerability, but to build an unassailable fortress of status that can protect us from the unbearable suspicion that we are in reality completely empty. In this constant pursuit of a reflected identity, we find ourselves profoundly, systemically exhausted. We are caught in a brilliant, self-imposed prison where the more we succeed in charming and impressing our chosen echo chambers, the more terrified and hollow we become when the audience goes home and the lights are turned off. We have optimized ourselves into a state of acute identity panic. We look at our achievements and our relationships, and we feel a deep ambient grief, the grief of an entity that only exists when it is being witnessed, praised, or evaluated by a panel of experts. We have constructed a life that is intellectually sparkling, socially flawless, and completely hollow at the center. We have eliminated the quiet, uncelebrated hours of our lives, treating any moment that cannot be documented, monetized, or shared with an elite peer group as a total waste of time, a failure of status, and a terrifying descent into social exile. We look at one another across the polished tables of our exclusive restaurants, or through the cold digital grids of our professional networks, and we participate in a highly sophisticated ritual of mutual performance. We use the vocabulary of alignment, excellence, and conscious community to mask a deep, desperate addiction to external applause, telling our peers that we are simply dedicated to high standards and meaningful impact. If we experience a sudden heavy wave of grief, or a quiet, unpolished moment of deep self-doubt in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, our first instinct is no longer to sit quietly with the feeling or to reach out to a companion with our guards. Our first instinct is to run the vulnerability through our internal public relations software, evaluating how we can reframe this struggle into a compelling narrative of resilience that our peer group will admire. We treat our raw human experiences as if they are raw materials to be manufactured into social capital, completely blind to the fact that we are slowly converting our actual hearts into sterile commodities. We have arrived at a state of deep existential weightlessness where our lives are lived entirely for the audience. We have forgotten that to be human is to possess a quiet, unwitnessed baseline of being a sovereign interiority that does not need a single like, a single promotion, or a single nod of approval from an elite inner circle to justify its presence on the earth. We have substituted the warm, heavy blood of an authentic, unpolished existence for the cold, predictable flash of a curated reflection. We spend our evenings reviewing our social positioning, drafting perfect remarks to impress our colleagues, and validating our worth through the numbers on our screens, completely blind to the fact that we are merely building our own cage brick by immaculate brick. We have made ourselves completely impressive, but we have also made ourselves entirely irrelevant to the quiet reality of our own souls. We feel this emptiness as a chronic, throbbing ache in the very center of our throats and jaws, a physical clenching that reminds us of the body's ancient, native capacity to simply breathe, to rest, and to exist without a single witness. We are homesick for a life where we were brave enough to be ordinary, where we were resilient enough to handle a quiet evening without running to our digital mirrors for confirmation, and where we could look at our own hands without calculating how they would appear to the highest bidders of social capital. We are terrified to step away from the mirror because we know that the moment we walk away from the elite pool, we will have to face the absolute silence of our own unwitnessed skin. We will have to stand in the middle of our lives without the scaffolding of our titles. We will have to endure the quiet weight of our ordinary days without the drug of public applause, and we will have to risk the deep, beautiful, and terrifying vulnerability of being completely alone with ourselves. We have built our entire identity on being the one who is recognized, the one who is aligned, the one who belongs to the inner circle, and the thought of dropping back into the uncelebrated baseline of our simple humanity feels like a total annihilation of the ego. But it is precisely within that annihilation, precisely within that surrender of our public mirrors, that our true, self-sustaining radiance waits, calling to us through the frozen armor of our performance to drop the mask, step into the dark woods, and finally dare to exist. To trace the full expansion of this validation-seeking disease, we must examine the archetypal figure of the elite mirror chaser, an individual whose entire life is a beautifully orchestrated, masterfully executed performance of social and intellectual calibration. This is someone who occupies the upper echelons of their chosen professional or cultural field, an expert curator of images, concepts, and relationships, who can scan a room or a digital network with the swift, analytical precision of a heat-seeking missile. They know exactly which phrases are current, which political or aesthetic alignments yield the highest social capital, and how to position themselves near the center of whatever elite inner circle is presently holding the mirror. When you meet this person, they are impeccably polite, intensely engaging, and entirely fluid, shifting their personality with the effortless ease of water to match the exact expectations of whoever is looking at them. They pride themselves on their high standards, their refined taste, and their curated circle of influential contacts, believing that this continuous elevation is the ultimate proof of their personal empowerment and evolutionary success. But if we step past this dazzling, hyper-polished surface, if we possess the eye of a trained anatomical investigator, we can see that this person's physical body has been forced to carry a terrifying, agonizing price for this constant state of performance. Consider the deep musculature of the throat, the root of the tongue, and the hyoid bone suspended beneath the jaw of this elite chaser. If we look closely at the tissue surrounding the suprahyoid and infrahyoid muscles, we find them held in an unrelenting, vice-like state of structural policing. The throat is never relaxed, it is a highly managed soundboard. The vocal apparatus is tightened and held at a specific attractive frequency that has been engineered over years to sound confident, articulate, and completely unshakable to the outside world. The natural raw timbre of the voice, ragged edges of exhaustion, the loose drops of spontaneous laughter, the deep, heavy resonance of grief is utterly suppressed before it can ever reach the air. The root of the tongue is pulled backward and clamped down against the floor of the mouth like a heavy iron trapdoor, ensuring that no uncurated, unoptimized, or ordinary human truth can slip past the gate. This chronic clenching leaves the individual walking through life with a tight, restricted throat that chokes off the literal current of their own native life force, turning their speech into a beautiful, dead simulation of intimacy. Moving slightly upward, we observe the permanent, hidden warfare that structures the jaw and the temporomandibular joint. If we look at the masseter and pterygoid muscles of this validation addict, we find them locked in a perpetual, silent squeeze. This is the mechanical infrastructure of the professional mask, the physical force required to hold a pleasant, engaged smile or a calm, neutral facial expression in place, while standing under the critical evaluation of their peers. Even when they are sitting in absolute silence, supposedly resting in their private quarters, their teeth are grinding together with an invisible, destructive pressure. They cannot allow the jaw to go slack, because a slack jaw is the posture of an ordinary creature that is tired, undefended, and fundamentally helpless in the face of the world. A loose jaw represents the total collapse of their public relations campaign. Therefore, the facial fascia is frozen into a rigid porcelain mold of high-status competence, generating an intense, ambient neural fatigue that radiates upward into the temples and locks the entire skull in a continuous state of defensive vigilance. The most devastating toll of this performance armor, however, is mapped directly onto the sternum and the upper rib cage. For the hypercalibrated mirror chaser, the upper chest is held in a permanent, hyperextended lift. The sternum is pushed forward and upward, projecting an artificial illusion of unshakable confidence, high social authority, and supreme personal empowerment. It is the posture of a monarch stepping out onto a balcony to receive the applause of the masses. But this structural inflation is a total biological lie. Because the upper rib cage is forced to stay in this rigid, dramatic lift, the natural, three-dimensional movement of the lungs is completely paralyzed. The breath cannot drop down into the lower belly or widen into the back ribs. It remains trapped in the shallow, frantic chambers of the upper chest, feeding a continuous loop of low-grade, high-priority survival anxiety. The individual is literally starving for oxygen while trying to look majestic, their heart locked behind a flat, rigid shield of bone that cannot expand with genuine joy or crack open with raw human grief, left sitting in a cold, numb, and dark vacuum behind a wall of performance. The behavioral consequence of this somatic armoring is a self-generating nightmare of psychological starvation. Because the body is held in this permanent state of physical presentation, the autonomic nervous system is forced to remain locked in a continuous sympathetic survival response. The brain, tracking this internal landscape of a tight throat, a clenched jaw, and an inflated chest, concludes that the individual is standing on an active stage surrounded by critical judges who will destroy them if they make a single unpolished move. The mind then seeks logical, intellectual justifications for this internal panic, projecting its anxiety onto every ordinary social encounter. The chaser looks at a quiet evening alone without a social event and labels it a catastrophic failure of status. They look at an unwitnessed, ordinary moment of rest and categorize it as total erasure, an existential descent into social exile. This diagnostic panic convinces the mind that the only way to survive is to return immediately to the elite pavilion, to seek more applause, to collect more titles, and to gather more reflections from the inner circle. Entirely unaware that the emptiness they are running from is being generated by the very armor they are using to look impressive. The deep psychological root of this obsession is the ancient, unhealed memory of our earliest visibility, once the terrifying experience of being unseen, unvalidated, or rejected by those we depended upon when our skin was soft, porous, and completely unshielded. At some point in our formative history, usually within the architecture of our early families or our initial peer groups, we discovered that our raw, ordinary and unpolished self was not enough to secure love or safety. We learned that we were only visible when we performed, when we brought home the highest marks, when we adopted the correct manners, or when we molded ourselves into a perfect mirror for our parents' unfulfilled egos. That early rejection was so somatically overwhelming to our primitive nervous systems that our minds made an absolute lifelong vow. I will make myself so dazzling, so elite, and so indispensable that the world will never be able to ignore me or cast me out again. The adult mirror chaser we see today is simply that terrified child who has grown up, acquired an advanced portfolio of social capital, and built a massive multi-million-dollar performance infrastructure around a heart that still feels inherently unlovable in its raw state. They are chasing the mercury pool because they are running from the historical ghost of their own unworthiness, using the applause of the elite to drown out the silent, terrifying suspicion that if they drop the mask, they will disappear into nothingness. To comprehend the absolute, self-defeating nature of this lifelong presentation, we must turn our gaze toward a specific architectural masterpiece hidden in the center of an elite, sunlit courtyard, the mercury-coated pool. Imagine a perfectly circular basin crafted from flawless ice-white marble, situated under the protective dome of a magnificent stone pavilion where only the most refined curators and celebrated minds are permitted to gather. Instead of being filled with fresh, clear rainwater from the mountains, this pool is lined with a thick, shimmering layer of liquid mercury. When the mirror chaser approaches the edge and looks down into the silver liquid, they do not see the distorted, moving reality of an ordinary water surface. They are met with an incredibly bright, hyper-sharp, and spectacularly flattering reflection of their own face. The heavy metal acts as a flawless mirror, smoothing out every line of exhaustion, magnifying their structural features, and casting an artificial, majestic glow around their head. The chaser stands at the rim, deeply intoxicated, drinking in their own reflected brilliance, while the other elite watchers around the perimeter nod their approval, confirming that this reflection is indeed the most elegant in the entire kingdom. But let us observe the terrible hidden physics that govern this beautiful pavilion as the hours pass uninterrupted beneath the dome. Mercury is not a benign element, it is a heavy, insidious, and systemic neurotoxin that requires no physical contact to execute its violence. The longer the chaser stands frozen over the white marble rim, bent forward to drink in their own reflected status and seeking the perpetual nod of the surrounding crowd, the more the invisible, odorless, toxic vapors seep silently into their open lungs. With every shallow breath taken in that closed pavilion, the heavy vapor enters, clouding the pathways of the brain, deadening the nerves, and rotting the actual, living physical tissues from the inside out. The chaser feels their limbs growing heavy, their memory slipping away, and a deep, chronic sickness settling into their bones. Yet they cannot pull themselves away from the edge. They are trapped by the silver liquid, terrified that if they take a single step backward into the dark, unwitnessed woods behind the pavilion, their reflection will vanish, leaving them completely erased, forgotten and dead. They choose to stay and be slowly poisoned by the status they are chasing, sacrificing their real, biological life for the cold, metallic image on the surface of the pool. This is the exact catastrophe that unfolds within our psychological and relational lives, when we are caught in the grip of the validation-seeking mind. The mercury-coated pool is our curated public identity, the complex web of social feeds, professional titles, intellectual alignments, and elite associations that we use to check our worth and confirm our existence. It works beautifully to soothe our insecurities in the short term, but it transforms our lives into a toxic, self-inflicted prison. We have become so addicted to the hyper-sharp reflection provided by our elite echo chambers that we are willing to inhale the toxic vapors of perpetual anxiety, chronic somatic freeze, and existential hollowing just to keep the applause from stopping. We have made ourselves entirely impressive to the audience, but we are dying of spiritual suffocation behind our porcelain masks, completely blind to the fact that while we are busy polishing our reflection in the silver pool, our authentic, raw humanity is rotting away from a total lack of fresh air and unwitnessed ground. It is precisely at this point of deep internal exile that the clean, uncompromising blade of the awakened one's wisdom cuts through our performative delusions. In the profound maps of human consciousness compiled by the ancient masters, there is an intensive investigation into how our demand for external validation multiplies our suffering. This mechanism is explained through the timeless teaching of the two arrows. When an ordinary human being steps out into the world and participates in the simple, unscripted landscape of daily existence, they are instantly struck by the first arrow. This first arrow is simply the raw, honest, and unavoidable reality of our fundamental ordinariness. The basic cosmic fact that human lives are filled with quiet, unmonetized, and uncelebrated hours, and that no human peer group can offer us an unbroken, eternal stream of praise. It is the reality that we must sometimes sit alone in an empty room without a title, without an audience, and without a mirror to tell us who we are. This first arrow is uncomfortable to an insecure ego, but it is limited, natural, and a fundamental part of the baseline of being alive. However, for the hyper-calibrated mirror chaser living over the rim of the Mercury Pavilion, the arrival of this first arrow is treated as a profound existential catastrophe, an unacceptable sentence of social death. Instead of allowing the quietness of the unwitnessed hour to be felt, instead of leaning into the simple, heavy texture of their own ordinary skin, they notch a second arrow into their bow and drive it deep into their own chest with their own hands. But this time, the second arrow is fashioned out of status panic and identity trauma. The mind explodes into a frenzy of frantic calculations, screaming internally, "If I am not being seen, I do not exist. If these elite people do not validate me, I am a total failure. I must do more, perform better, and adjust my mask to win back their gaze." This second arrow is the arrow of radical resistance to our true nature, using our intelligence to turn a quiet, unwitnessed moment into an existential crisis, punishing ourselves for our simple humanity, choosing to bleed to death from the frantic demand for constant applause rather than enduring a single hour of beautiful, silent ordinariness. The core fallacy that drives this performance is the illusion of the witnessed self. The hyper-calibrated mind operates under the delusional belief that its worth is an object, a fragile artifact that must be continuously validated, reflected, and confirmed by external mirrors to remain real. We treat our identity as if it is a public relations campaign that must be constantly maintained, completely blind to the supreme law of nature, the law of non-self and innate luminosity. The awakened one looked deep into the fabric of reality and realized that our true nature is not a separate, fragile ego that needs a social audience to justify its existence. Our true nature is the vast, open and self-luminous field of awareness itself, a space that stands completely independent of public applause, requiring no external mirrors, no elite circles, and no digital likes to confirm its majestic completeness. The ancient sages reminded us that true emotional freedom is not found by polishing the mask to secure a brighter reflection in the mercury pool. It is found by having the radical courage to smash the glass, walk away from the pavilion, and realize that the light we have been chasing through the eyes of others has always been the native, self-sustaining radiance of our own unwitnessed skin. The realization that our pursuit of external validation has merely turned into a toxic chamber of self-suffocation does not mean we must violently discard our social networks or retreat into permanent isolation. Rather, it provides us with the first genuine opportunity to lift our faces from the silver pool and step into the fresh air. We stand at the edge of our polished pavilions, looking at the hyper-sharp reflections we have spent so much energy manufacturing, but now we see them as monuments to our own historical terror of being unseen. The work before us is not to destroy our lives, but to cultivate a profound internal architecture of retraining. We must learn the practice of self-sustaining softening, a systematic method of mind and body cultivation that allows a human being to dissolve their performance armor and step into the quiet, heavy majesty of their own unwitnessed existence. We must train our tissues and our thoughts to stop begging for applause, allowing our true nature to rest deeply within the solid, self-sustaining baseline of our own skin. This retraining begins at the most immediate interface of our biology, with the physical deconstruction of our performance mask, starting with the deep unfreezing of the throat, the root of the tongue, and the hyoid bone. Because we have spent years holding our vocal apparatus at an attractive controlled frequency to impress our chosen echo chambers, the suprahyoid and infrahyoid muscles beneath the jaw are locked in a permanent squeeze. We begin by directing a soft, heavy, and entirely uncritical attention directly into this throat gate. In the middle of an ordinary day, while standing in a meeting, drafting a social remark, or waiting for a response from an elite colleague, we invite the throat to grow wide, cool, and spacious. We let the root of the tongue drop completely away from the palate, relaxing down into the floor of the mouth like a heavy piece of wet cloth. We allow the jaw to unlock, letting the back teeth separate by a fraction of an inch, acknowledging that we no longer need to hold a porcelain smile to survive our daily encounters. As this throat armor thaws, we allow our awareness to roll upward and outward into the temporomandibular joint and the masseter muscles of the jaw. We locate that tight, hidden pressure where we grind our teeth to maintain an expression of high-status competence, and we deliberately invite it to yield. We let the lower jaw hang loose and heavy, dropping the rigid mold of the professional mask, letting the facial fascia soften until the expressions of our eyes and cheeks become completely natural, fluid, and uncalculated. We allow this soft somatic release to drip downward past the neck, into the hyper-extended shield of the sternum and upper rib cage. We consciously release that dramatic, artificial lift that we have maintained to project an illusion of unshakable authority. We let the breastbone drop back into natural gravity, allowing the upper chest to soften and flatten, breaking the biological lie of our constant presentation. By dropping the sternum and unlocking the jaw, we collapse the physical infrastructure of our validation addiction, transforming our bodies from stiff, performing statues into open, grounded vessels of presence. Within this relaxed somatic framework, we introduce the practice of the unwitnessed hour. This is the mental and behavioral discipline of intentionally engaging in tasks, creative projects, or moments of deep rest that are completely undocumented, unshared, and unoptimized for status. We dedicate a specific window of our day to doing something entirely for its own sake, hidden from the eyes of our elite peer group. We write words that will never be published. We make art that will never be displayed on a screen. We cook a meal that will never be photographed, or we simply sit on a bench and look at the trees without turning the experience into a narrative of personal growth for public consumption. We take this unwitnessed step with our boots firmly planted on the ground, allowing ourselves to experience the raw, heavy, and quiet texture of being entirely alone with ourselves. We trained our nervous systems to tolerate the exquisite discomfort of a lack of public applause. If the mind begins to panic during this quiet hour, if it begins to scream that we are wasting our time, that we are becoming irrelevant, or that we are sliding into social exile, we do not reach for our devices to check our notifications. We do not look for a mirror to confirm our value. We stay on the bench. We feel the raw weight of the anxiety landing on our soft, bare chests, and we breathe straight into the center of the feeling. We train the brain to realize a profound existential truth. Our existence does not depend on the witness of the crowd. We learn that we are still here, still real, and still majestic even when nobody is clapping, building internal muscle by staying present within the quiet baseline of our simple humanity. As we stabilize this capacity to exist without an audience, we must turn this radical honesty toward our social interactions, initiating the practice of the uncalibrated voice. The next time we enter our professional or cultural networks, we choose to drop our public relations software entirely. When someone asks us a question, instead of filtering our words through our internal diagnostic software to evaluate which response yields the highest social capital, we take a deep breath into our wide, relaxed lower bellies, we unlock our throats, and we speak from the immediate, unoptimized truth of our immediate experience. If we are tired, we allow our voice to carry the heavy frequency of our fatigue. If we do not know the answer to an intellectual question, we say "I don't know" without a single layer of defensive justification. If we are feeling clumsy or insecure, we let that vulnerability show through the raw, unpolished timbre of our speech. We choose to stand raw within the uncelebrated truth of who we are in that exact hour, refusing to adjust our masks to win the approval of the inner circle. We treat the social encounters not as auditions for a spot in the elite mirror, but as ordinary opportunities to connect from our shared human vulnerability. We discover that when we stop demanding that our presence be constantly impressive, we lose our brittle, frantic nature and acquire the deep, flexible, and indestructible strength of a solid mountain that stands in the empty mist. We realize that our value is not an object that must be validated by the eyes of others, but an intrinsic, self-sustaining reality that is already complete, vast and luminous, requiring no audience to justify its existence on the earth. This renluant tum tree requires a fierce, moment-by-moment vigilance that must be executed in the middle of our most high-stakes social performances, especially when our old habits of validation-seeking are triggered by the world. It is the practice of catching the mind at the exact microsecond when it wants to polish its reflection or alter its behavior to please a high-status peer. It is noticing the moment your throat tightens to deliver an overly sophisticated remark to impress a colleague, or the moment your sternum inflates because you want to project an illusion of superior competence in a crowded room. In that precise instant of status panic, you catch the impulse. You do not react, you do not perform, and you do not run to your public relations software. You take a deep, unrestricted breath into the very bottom of your soft, unclenched pelvis. You drop your shoulders. You allow your jaw to go completely slack under the influence of presence, and you choose to stay entirely unwitnessed, ordinary, and self-sustaining to the moment. You train your mind to understand that your ultimate liberation is not found by polishing the mask to secure a brighter reflection in the mercury pool, but by having the radical courage to smash the glass, walk away from the pavilion, and realize that the light you have been chasing through the eyes of others has always been the native, self-sustaining radiance of your own unwitnessed skin. You become like an old oak tree that grows in the deepest part of the forest, shedding its leaves, growing its roots, and stretching its branches toward the sky, without a single witness to applaud its symmetry. You realize that your true nature is not a fragile artifact that must be validated by an elite inner circle, but a boundless, unshatterable field of awareness that can hold the entire universe with all its applause, its silence, its fame, and its obscurity within the warm, eternal embrace of its own infinite and undefended space. As this self-sustaining softening sinks into the deepest channels of our physical form, the toxic, silver vapors of the Mercury Pavilion begin to clear from our lungs, replaced by the crisp, wild, and honest air of an unwitnessed life. The heavy, white marble rim we spent so many years bent over, desperately searching for a reflection that would tell us who we are, dissolves back into the ordinary clay of the earth. This is the realization of the self-sustaining baseliner state of consciousness, where we no longer view our worth as a public relations campaign that must be continuously funded, updated, and validated by the applause of an elite circle. We walk out of the sunlit courtyard of our social performances and step directly into the quiet, uncelebrated landscape of our immediate existence. And the exhausting, hyper-vigilant habit of polishing our porcelain masks is finally, completely abandoned. We are no longer chasing reflections in the silver liquid. We are living our lives from the inside out, anchored in the massive, indisputable reality of our own unpolished architecture. The physical reality of this new state is marked by an immense, settled density throughout the entire vocal and respiratory system. Our lower jaw hangs loose and easy, the muscles of the masseter completely released from the silent, teeth-grinding warfare of presentation. The throat is a wide, dark, and soft cavern, allowing the root of the tongue to rest heavily upon the floor of the mouth, releasing our speech with a spontaneous, uncalculated resonance that matches our true human frequency. The sternum is no longer hyperextended into a dramatic shield of superior status. It has dropped back into natural gravity, flattening and softening to allow the lungs to expand in all three dimensions. The breath drops effortlessly past the solar plexus and into the very base of the unclenched pelvic floor, plugging us directly into the grid of the earth. We walk into a room not as performers scanning for approval, but as organic creatures that belong to the soil, our feet absorbing the weight of our bodies with a heavy, deliberate dignity that requires no audience to confirm its majesty. In this state of self-sustaining radiance, we discover the exquisite, unwitnessed beauty of being a simple human being. We no longer feel the need to look down upon the quiet, ordinary, or unmonetized hours of our lives. We meet them as the very soil where our authentic humanity is cultivated. We are no longer afraid to sit alone in an empty room without a title, a notification, or a mirror, because we know that our existence is not an object to be validated, is an intrinsic, infinite reality that stands independent of public applause. We have broken the second arrow of status panic across our knees and thrown its splinters into the wet grass. We are finally brave enough to stand raw, vulnerable, and thoroughly drenched by the first arrow of our baseline ordinariness, realizing that true spiritual maturity is not the capacity to remain dazzling to the inner circle, but the sovereign courage to smash the glass and disappear into the wild, honest woods of our own unwitnessed skin. We realize, as we rest in this deep physical intimacy with the uncelebrated now, the ultimate meaning of the mountain that stands in the empty mist. The ancient masters did not spend their lifetimes polishing their reflections in the courtyard of the elite. They left the palaces, turned their backs on the applause of kings, and walked directly into the remote, silent canyons where there was nobody to witness their alignment. They sat beneath the old pine trees, letting their names be forgotten, their titles rust away, and their porcelain masks shatter against the stones, completely secure in the realization that the true light of awareness does not need an echo chamber to be real. They were reminding us for all eternity that our liberation is not a performance to be captured, but a radical, total, and uncompromising return to the unwitnessed baselength, understanding that the sacred and the ordinary, the cosmic oneness and the quiet, unapplauded human heart, are the exact same river flowing through our veins. We stand now at the edge of the pavilion, the white marble pillars receding into the distance, the shimmering mercury pool lying stagnant and abandoned at our backs, no longer needed by a creature that has learned how to breathe without an audience. The designer perfumes have evaporated into a silent ash, and the cold, competitive air of our elite echo chambers has been replaced by the wet, rich scent of the wild earth after rain. We look down at our own hands, at the soft, steady rise and fall of our unshielded chests, and we realize that we are finally ready to drop the mask, leave the stage, and begin the real, heavy work of living for ourselves. We can choose to run back to the silver pool, to repair our public relations software, to patch the tears in our professional masks, and to spend another lifetime pretending to be elite while our actual hearts die of starvation behind our titles. Or we can choose the path of self-sustaining radiance, stepping forward into the volatile, beautiful landscape of our tomorrow, with our throats soft, our jaws loose, and our warm human skin completely awake to the unwitnessed hour. As you step out into the unscripted weather of your life, with all its ordinary relationships, its quiet routines, and its fierce demands for your simple presence, the choice remains entirely yours. What would happen if you finally dared to smash your public mirrors and realize that the light you have been chasing through the eyes of others has always been the native, self-sustaining radiance of your own unapplauded heart?